In our region, we only value tangible assets, and you can find huge investments in buildings and machineries. But when it comes to intangible assets like know-how and branding, we tend to deal with them as secondary priority. Many innovators think that branding is not a big deal and I can do it myself. And with all due respect, but it doesn't work this way.
Welcome to HeroInside the Ingredient Branding Podcast with Tomas. In each episode, Tomas will draw from his vast experience as the go-to global ingredient branding expert and will discuss this subject with visionaries and pioneers in the field. How do you go from the zero position as a supplier of a new ingredient to the hero position in demand around the world? Let's find out.
Welcome back to the HeroInside Ingredient Branding Podcast. My name is Tomas Vučurović, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our 14th episode. Today, I'm going to deep dive into the world of natural fibers, bio-based materials, and the global shift towards a renewable bioeconomy with a truly impressive guest, Dr. Mohamad Midani. Mohamad is one of the leading thinkers shaping the future of the bioeconomy. With a PhD in fiber and polymer science from North Carolina State University, he combines research, teaching, and industry work in a way that bridges scientific depth with real-world application. He's also the CEO and co-founder of the VALORIZEN Innovation Center, a professor and an active contributor to commercialization projects across the Arab region, and brings a rare mix of expertise and practical insight. He's a prominent voice in the Middle East's emerging bio-based material landscape and the editor of the upcoming book, Mapping the Arab Materials Bioeconomy. We have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Mohamad, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you here. I made already the introduction in the intro, so let's not waste any time because we have so much to discuss, so that we could record probably several episodes of this. So let's stick to what our community can benefit from you most. I have a question to you for the opening. The latest textile exchange report, I'm sure you have seen it, still shows and will also show in the upcoming years an overwhelmingly high share of synthetic fibers, while bio-based materials remain at a very small market share. Yet you have dedicated and you are dedicating so much of your time and your career to advance bio-based fibers. So please share with us what drives you to keep pushing in this direction. Where is your passion coming from for bio-based fibers?
So thank you, Tomas, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be part of this show. So actually, I grew up in a family with a long history in the textile industry. So actually, textiles was a family culture, and I had so much curiosity about fiber composition. And I was that person, who would browse the garment labels whenever I go shopping. And this is where I started learning about different natural fibers. And I wanted to know what's the difference between wool, cashmere, merino, and mohair. What's the difference between Pima cotton, Egyptian cotton, and just regular cotton? And this curiosity is the main reason why I ended up studying textiles technology and further doing my PhD in fiber science. But I came to realize that the industry has developed a strong reliance on fossil-based synthetic fibers, which accounts to almost 70% of our annual fiber consumption. And I asked myself, what will happen when the world runs out of fossil resources? And by the way, this is not just a problem with textile industry. It's also the same problem across all industrial sectors, which is a real threat. So reducing our reliance on fossil-based materials and relying more on bio-based renewable materials, it's a matter of human survival. And the bio-based industries have significant potential in supporting sustainable development, improving livelihoods, and creating green jobs, especially in rural areas while significantly reducing the carbon dioxide emissions across industries. So this is why I'm still dedicated to this sector.
Super. Thank you very much for this very personal introduction and also explaining your background that you have on that to your family. So, what do you think are the biggest obstacles at the moment to reduce our global dependence on fossil based resources?
So this is a bit of a hard question, but like the simple answer is in order to reduce the global dependence on fossil-based materials, we just need alternative bio-based solutions. But the first obstacle is actually time. And as you know, bio-based material innovations are deep tech, which solve big problems with massive impact potential, but they are driven by science and long-term discovery, and the real progress comes from years of R&D, and unfortunately, most projects even fail before making any profits. So we need patient capital, and success comes only from those investors who value this transformation over quick returns and quick profit, and who can actually wait a decade before seeing a result. I know this is very utopian, but this is the case. And actually, the second obstacle is the value chain. In most cases, you're building a value chain, not a supply chain. You're not joining an existing system. You're actually creating one from scratch, including raw materials sourcing, processes, and market development. And the third obstacle is scaling from pilot to demonstration plants and from demonstration plants to the first of a kind industrial facility. And as you know, these transition points specifically turn to be very difficult. And this is why it's often referred to as the valley of death.
Yes, the valley of death describes the time between maybe some sample materials and then a successful mass commercialization. And obviously, the downside of these deep tech, huge investments and long development times is then the price. So we also see the problem that a lot of the bio-based deep tech materials are coming at price points that are by far not comparable with the synthetic materials that are commercialized since decades. And we are now talking for nylon or polyester prices from Asia in the area of even below $2 per kilo. So that will also make it very difficult, particularly as the brands always use the argument that the consumers would not be willing to pay more for more sustainable products. How do you see that in your thinking?
I think it's just an evolution, synthetic counterparts. They took years to evolve into such perfect performance, cost effectiveness, efficient production, and huge scale. So we didn't invest the same resources yet in perfecting bio-based materials. So it's a matter of phase lag. If bio-based materials receive the same amount of investment, I would say they can become as perfect as their synthetic counterparts.
Interesting. One way of making fibers more known and more successful is also ingredient branding. And probably the area of synthetic fibers and product technologies is the area where we see most ingredient branding of all industries. Almost every fiber type there is represented by strong ingredient brands. In opposite, if we look at bio-based materials and also very much natural materials, these brands are rather weak. Can you give us an overview of the current situation? And how would you describe the landscape of ingredient brands in bio-based materials?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, this is very true. So like the first generation of bio-based materials mostly tended to be generic and unbranded, like cotton, linen, rayon, cellulose acetate, particle board, leather, beeswax, and so on. So those materials relied primarily on certifications to differentiate themselves and to be associated, for instance, with unique benefits or features like Woolmark, Egyptian cotton, Masters of Linen, FSC wood. But the next generation bio-based materials, they've realized the power of branding, and you will find that many of them have developed interesting brands. For instance, in the man-made cellulosic space, there are several brands like Tencel, for instance, Spinova, Orange Fiber, and more recently, Cura by Metza Spring. And in the biomanufacturing space, you will find fermented protein fibers like Spiber and Procell, and Kelson seaweed fibers by Keel Labs. And same thing in natural fibers space, especially the new plant-based fibers. You will find interesting brands like Pinatex, Pineapple Fibers, Bananatex, Altmat Hemp, and BioPuff, which is a brand making waddings from cattail fibers. And you will find so many other creative examples in the leather alternatives, bioplastics, sustainable packaging, and bio-based construction materials.
So the examples you are mentioning, they are standing on some proprietary technology and a certain process which allows them maybe more distinction against other materials than the purely natural materials. As you said before, cotton and other natural fibers are genuinely available worldwide or in the markets and areas where they're marketed. So they are not owned by a single company or by a brand. And therefore, also the marketing for such generic raw materials is more difficult. So what I see is that there are some corporations that market together fibers, but the uniqueness and the specificness of a brand where you own a proprietary technology, where you own certain processes, is much sharper. So do you think that's a weakness, that kind of nobody owns leather, nobody owns cotton, nobody owns palm? Nobody owns those natural fibers. Is it because of that more difficult for them to become strong ingredient brands?
I think it's just like a no man's land. So you can't just brand such ingredients in their raw, like generic form. You need to have some, like as you mentioned, proprietary, like added value that you've created, like a certain refinement stage or a certain treatment method to make them better, whether in their performance or more responsible in their production. So there's always a way to add your unique proprietary touch into something that is still natural.
Very interesting. Let's go a little bit to your activities that you are doing in the region. You're based in Cairo, and we met and we talked about different concepts where you are involved. For a lot of that also related to waste out of certain natural materials like date, like palm tree. And tell us a little bit about the activities that are going on in the Arab world or in the Arab Peninsula where you are involved.
Yes. So, as you know, like I lived for some long time in the United States during my master's and my PhD studies, and I was truly amazed by their power in commercialization and crafting stories and purpose for every product, be it a raw material, intermediary, or even a final product. But while ingredient branding is a well known practiced art in these regions, in other regions, like for instance the Middle East and North Africa, this is a completely new art. For instance, in Arab countries, the bio based material innovation is still in its infancy stage, and there is huge potential, especially with the amazing diversity of biomass resources in the region. But despite this potential, you will find very few ingredient brands in this space. And an excellent example is an Emirati company called Desert Board, who is transforming date palm fronds into a type of engineered wood branded as PSB. or palm strand board. They have amazingly integrated the cultural aspect of the date palm in the region with the high performance of the board and the ecological significance of upcycling the discarded palm waste into their ingredient brand messaging. And while this desert board company is just one example, yet the potential of ingredient branding in unlocking bio based material innovations in the region is really huge.
Well, it has definitely also something to do with the traditional North-South relationships between brands and retailers being very strong in the North and the Southern Hemisphere often considered as suppliers. And I mean, ingredient branding, if I talk with my clients, our mission is to help our customers to get more value out of their innovation. But a lot of these traditional companies or farmers, they're used to be a supplier and, they don't want or they are not able to think about how is my material further processed? What kind of impact can my material have? And then also, do I have the resources? But not only the resources, do I have the willingness? And do I also have the long breath to go on that journey? Because it's not easy. We all know it and we heard it from many of my guests in the previous episodes. It takes 10 years to build a brand, particularly an ingredient brand in the textile sector, where we are discussing also timelines that if we introduce a commercial material at a trade show, it might take 2 years until it's in a collection that you can find in retail, unless you are selling it through fast fashion chains like H&M, Zara, or even Shein, then maybe this circle is faster. But if you're in the premium area, it takes years until your product shows up for the first time in the market. And then it needs to be there repetitively over many years with many brands in bigger collections. So it's not easy. It requires money, vision, passion, and a few other things. But it also requires education. And is that maybe one of the things that you would see helpful for a stronger development of ingredient branding in your region? So if you would have some wishes that you could express, what would it be to help all these talented people in your region to do more ingredient branding?
Yes, that's a good question. So, look, Tomas, in our region, so we only value tangible assets, and you can find huge investments in buildings and machineries. But when it comes to intangible assets like know how and branding, we tend to deal with them as secondary priority. Many innovators think that branding is not a big deal and I can do it myself, and they actually end up naming a product or an ingredient after their wife's name or daughter's name. And with all due respect, but it doesn't work this way. Ingredient branding is an art, and there are masters in this field, including yourself. So for God's sake, if you have a significant bio-based ingredient, you should really seek expert support in branding it.
Yes, but we saw a similar development also in Asia. And if you compare it, China was for many, many years only a manufacturing spot until the Chinese government maybe realized, but also companies and entrepreneurs, that branding has a lot of value. And we see now how, for example, if you look at sportswear, if you look at branding in general, we see the situation that Chinese capital has bought many brands in the West, including brands like Volvo, or if you look at Anta Sports, they own half of the performance brands in skiing and outdoor in the meantime. So this could also happen with ingredient brands, and this could also be an opportunity for investors from your region not to think about building up brands from scratch and doing all that way, but potentially also looking at acquisitions or collaborations with already existing brands.
Yes, this is true. And I think it's not just the case for China, but also you'll see, for instance, in Turkey. Turkey for a long time. It has been also the manufacturing hub for European apparel. But they also the government have realized that we need to focus more on the added value, and they have created their own brands now rather than just working on outsourcing. So yes, like government and national strategies play a strong role in this context.
Okay, let's switch a little bit to your activities in VALORIZEN. We know you're a professor for the fibers and the polymers, but you're also a co-founder of VALORIZEN as an innovation hub. Tell us a little bit, what are you doing there? What is your mission in this company?
Mhm. Yes, so it's a simple mission. So we believe that there are so many underutilized resources in our region that remains underutilized just because the lack of knowledge. We don't have maybe the knowledge that such resources even exist. Maybe we don't have the knowledge of what's the value of this material, or maybe we don't have the knowledge how to transform it from one state to a higher added value state, or maybe we don't have the knowledge of what are the possible markets for and applications for such resources. So we are mainly focusing on those, like rediscovering those underutilized resources through research and innovation, and developing technologies to commercialize such innovations. Uh, Over the past 3 years since we started VALORIZEN, we've developed three major technology platforms. One platform, it's called PalmFil, which is actually transforming date palm agricultural residues, which is an abundant residue in the region, into textile fibers and reinforcements. And the reason why I call it like a platform is because we're creating a raw material which can be used in different end use applications, be it in textiles and garments, or be it like a fiber for making thermal insulation, or being molded like pulped and molded into packaging, like biodegradable packaging, and so many other applications. And another platform, but this technology is still in the development pipeline, so it's still in like the technological readiness level 6. We've completed the pilot stage or pilot scale validation, and now we're in the preparation for building demonstrator. But we have another platform that is really interesting, and it has been now commercialized. It's for converting date palm residues into soilless growing media and substrates. And as you know, nowadays, the entire world is transitioning from outdoor farming more into indoor farming. And there is a critical component in indoor farming, which is the growing media. So the substrate in which you grow the plants in. And there is a global shortage in this, especially after some recent legislations with banning sphagnum pitmos. So we've developed soilless growing media and substrate. It's called PalmPeat, which fulfills the very stringent requirements of the professional growers. And now we have transitioned from all the way from the early concept and the lab stage into an industrial scale. And we have already offtake agreements from leading growing media companies in the Netherlands. And we think this is a very significant innovation because it's directly linked to food security in the region and also worldwide. And our third platform or innovation is Noukk, which is considered the first luxury and fine textiles made from fine Arabian camel hair. I know, like camel hair itself, it's not something new. Hair from Mongolian camels, for instance, has been used for long times. So the Mongolian camel, the one with the two humps. But on the other hand, the Arabian camel, the one with a single hump, its hair was never used in making textiles, and it remained a traditional material with unlimited crafts with almost no value. And Noukk actually was the first to develop the technical process of refining the Arabian camel hair into a cashmere-like luxury textiles. But many of these processes, as you know, are difficult to patent or protect. And we've realized that the only way we can protect our long years of development is by developing a strong ingredient brand in the case of Noukk. And as we've been developing Noukk fiber, this is an interesting story. Like, as we've been developing Noukk fiber, we've always wondered, why do people still own camels? Is it for producing milk? Is it for meat, mobility, for wool? But we found out that the answer was none of the above. It was actually a symbol of social status and prestige. So we saw this opportunity of developing new fine textiles as an ambassador of the Arabian culture, and we call it precious threads of the Sahara, similar to how vicuña is considered the gold of the Andes in South America. And by the way, we have an interesting update regarding Noukk. It has just been awarded the Red Dot Design Award in Berlin last week, which is an incredible recognition.
Wonderful. I think these are three amazing platforms working with the materials from your region: palm trees, date, camel hair. All sounds super exciting. And we had the privilege to already know some details about these projects. And it's really, really wonderful. So, hearing about your vast experience on natural fibers, synthetic fibers, the role you play as a professor, as an investor. Let's reverse the roles a little bit at the end of this session. What is your question, or what would be a challenge around ingredient branding that you would like to address, or maybe get my perspective on? For any of those PalmFil, Noukk, Date, or any of the other projects that you are involved, or also more in general.
Yes, that's a good opportunity. But I've always wondered, like throughout the development cycle of new bio-based materials, when is the ideal time to start developing your ingredient brand? Because sometimes like we develop like a brand name and a website, but later down the road, we realize that there was something wrong and we need to change this. So, from your perspective, when is the ideal time to start developing your ingredient brand?
That's a very good question. And I think in the ingredient brand community, we are having very vivid discussions just in those days, as you are probably aware that a couple of large funded bio-based companies didn't make it in the last couple of weeks or months and had to get out of business, struggling. And the people are saying, yeah, they invested hundreds of millions were invested in ingredient branding, and it was a big failure. I don't share that view, because if we look at the cases that didn't make it through the valley of death, I would say they actually never made it even to the start line of ingredient branding, because none of them had products in the market, buyable products. Some maybe had some capsule collection, a handbag with Stella McCartney to generate a lot of PR buzz. But nobody was actually at that point that you also described, that they would have mass commercialized products for reasonable price points in big volumes in the market. And also, they didn't invest any of that money into consumer brand awareness and preference. That money was spent on whatever, R&D, factories, people, patents. I mean, all under the premises that they want to build an ingredient brand business, maybe. And I think that is the big difference between, let's say, 30, 40 years ago, or what I call the first generation ingredient brands. They first had a product, right? It was ready. It was ready to be commercialized. And then they said, oh my God, we need a name. We need a brand name. And then they came up with the brand, and maybe brands like, Primaloft, Gore-Tex, Polartec. They came maybe after the companies already had a finished product that was researched, developed, patent protected. And now it's the opposite. Now the companies have a brand, but they don't have a product. And many of them are burning their brand or need to reconfigure their brand stories as in the development of the technology over many years, the propositions are changing and maybe the name or the brand or the positioning doesn't fit anymore. So at the moment, I would say, wait, and also be clear what is your company name, and maybe don't make your company name also your brand name, so that you can build your company brand, your corporate brand, who's that startup who's developing a technology. But don't go too early into kind of branding a product that you don't know if you're ever going to make it, and then burn that brand literally before it hits the market. So that would be my answer to the situation at the moment.
Wonderful. I think this is very valuable insight. And I agree with you about like the importance of this timing and how like first generation ingredient brands started with product and a solid commercial base and then realized that they need to establish a brand, while nowadays many of the bio-based innovations or just new innovations, they are starting with a brand with no products to sell. So having this balance is really important.
Yeah, I mean, they create their first brand to generate investors. They need a brand for their pitch deck in order to get money and to get funded. But that brand might not be the brand that at the end will use when they successfully commercialize a product 5 or 10 years later.
Yes. And with especially with the like AI tools that you can generate literally anything like photos, product videos, you can generate anything. So you can craft a whole story around a product or a technology that doesn't even exist.
Let's hope that the trademark offices around the world are also starting to use AI, so that the AI brand that you have created in 5 seconds still needs 1.5 years to be registered. So I
Yes.
think there is a little bit of a time lag in this. And I also, it's my personal opinion, I think the whatever global trade organizations need to anyway rethink the whole trademarking procedures, because all the words are used and everything has been used. And I'm not sure if in the year 2030, the way we today have to register trademarks and the processes in which it's done will survive, because there are almost no words left where you can create a brand for.
True.
So, Mohamad, thank you very much for this magical insights into the Middle East and Arab view on bio-based materials, natural materials, ingredient branding. I always value my conversations with you. Do you have a kind of a final statement also for your audience, maybe in the region? I'm sure you're also going to spread that podcast maybe also in your region.
Yes, definitely.
So what would be your call for action to the local community? Would it be brave or believe in value or something like this? How would you formulate it?
I think like don't attempt to do the branding yourself. Seek expert support. Branding is a valuable asset, as valuable as machinery and buildings. So we need to change this mindset a bit in the region.
Super. Good. Thank you very much. It was great to have you on our show, and I'm looking forward to see you soon one day, maybe in Cairo or in London or somewhere around the world. Thank you, Mohammed, for your participation.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tomas, for having me and for this wonderful conversation.
That brings us to the end of today's conversation with Dr. Mohamad Midani. We explored why biomaterials matter in the global shift away from fossil resources, the structural challenges that keep natural fibers from scaling, and how ingredient branding can unlock visibility and value for innovators in the Arab world and the Middle East. One great example are the precious threads of the Sahara, under the brand Noukk that also just won a Red Dot Award in Germany. To share your insights and questions for this episode, head over to our brand LinkedIn page and join the conversation. The link, as always, will be posted in the show notes. Subscribe to the Hero Inside podcast to be sure not to miss the next episode. Until then, keep exploring, learning, and being a hero in your journey towards a better world.
This has been an episode of Hero Inside the Ingredient Branding Podcast with Tomas Vučurović. Each episode features stories and wisdom from game-changing creators and the shapers of the world's most exciting and influential ingredient brand. To learn more about ingredient branding and Tomas's work, visit brained.co. That's BRAIND.co. Until next time.